I'd like to introduce Mr. David Bradley. He represents the Southwest Texas area on the State Board of Education. He was first elected to the State Board in 1996 and has since been re-elected in 2000, 2002, 2004, 2008, and 2012. He currently serves on the Board's Committee on School Finance and Permanent School Fund, and during his tenure on the Board, he has served on all the Board subcommittees. Mr. Bradley is married and has 2 children. He is a self-employed businessman and is licensed in insurance and real estate sales. He received his Eagle Scout Award in 1972 and served on the executive board of the Three Rivers Council of the Boy Scouts of America. He is a graduate of the Houston Independent School District's Magnet Program, High School for Health Professions. He attended the University of Houston, and I think this will get a big response, and the Texas A&M University, where he was a proud member of the Texas Aggie Corps of Cadets. Please welcome Mr. Bradley.
I think the greatest legislative priority ought to be that Texas has to play A&M. How many of you have your tickets to the national championships next year with Alabama? There you go. You got a lot of new best friends, don't you? I appreciate the opportunity to come in and visit y'all. And it's great. A lot of people have walked up that I've met before and worked with before in trying to provide the best education policy, public education policy for our communities and the state. But it does have controversy. I'm really sorry to hear about the threats. Usually I only get those when I go to Austin. But then if someone's not mad at me, I generally figure out pretty quick I'm not doing my job. I want to give my hats off to a couple soccer moms, and I say that in the most appreciative and sincere way. This started up and it's only been running about 2 weeks, and look at the turnout. And I got that phone call 2 weeks ago from a couple of the ladies and going, what is it? What can I do? And this is what happens, 2 weeks of a couple of ladies putting their minds to it, trying to fix it. Get my technology to work. Every time you try to use technology and it doesn't work, remember what happens in the classroom. I want to give a quote. That invocation was really nice. I got to do an invocation at our last board meeting, and I started off with a quote. And the quote was, "The highest glory of the American Revolution is it connected in one indissoluble bond the principles of civil government with the principles Christianity." John Quincy Adams. Don't let anybody tell you that there's a separation of church and state. Why do we have 150 members in our state house in Texas? Does anybody know? Does anybody know why we have 31 Senate seats? How many books and verses are in Psalms and Proverbs? They're identical. In each member's house desk in the Texas House of Representatives is a Bible. It was originally put there when the Capitol was built. And each member uses that same Bible for over the last 160-some odd years. One indissoluble bond between Christianity and our government. I got involved in public policy, public education policy, because I wasn't a soccer mom. I was just a dad. And I really wasn't interested in school board policy, much less the politics of it. I was busy doing a business, raising a family, trying to provide. Until someone came along and told me a story, and it stirred me into action, much like these ladies 2 weeks ago. And it was a court case, and this attorney told me the story. And there was a gentleman named Larry Maxwell. He worked at one of the refineries in Pasadena. Now, how many of you know someone who works in a refinery? Dads? You go to work, you work hard, you come home, you try to provide for your family. And if you're a good dad, you sit down with your kids and go, "Hey, sweetie, what happened at school today?" And that's what happened with Larry. He sat down with his daughter and said, "Hey, honey, tell me what you did in school today." Just the same question he asked every day. And she says, "Well, we took a test." He said, "Well, what kind of test was it?" Well, I don't know, Dad. Well, was it history? Was it science? Was it math? What kind of a test was it? She said, well, it was in science class or history class, but it had nothing to do with the subject. Well, what was it? Well, it was more of a survey. He said, well, that had nothing to do with science. So let me go down and find out what it is. They wanted to know how many parents were in the home, how many other kids, who worked, who didn't work. Larry said, that's a bunch of nonsense. Kind of reminds you about the two moms that started to hear things going on in the curriculum. So he went down in Pasadena, ISD, everybody here knows where that is. He went into the principal's office and he said, I'd like to know what you were teaching my child. What's that all about? Kind of like the reactions the parents have gotten from the CSCOPE folks. We can't tell you. Code word for we don't want to tell you. So he didn't have any satisfaction with the principal. He didn't believe in that secrecy. There is a little provision in the Texas Education Code that says that a parent has the right to review all instructional materials. So this parent asked again. This time he took it all the way to the superintendent. The superintendent tried to tell him the same thing. Couldn't release the information to him. And then to add insult to injury, the superintendent said, and if I were to give it to you, you were not qualified to understand it. I love Larry Maxwell. That dad got up on his hind legs. He sued the district for the right to review the instructional materials that were being used in the classroom. Now, we've come a long way in Texas. This was 20-some odd years ago. Local board, with you on the jury, and you on the jury, and you on the jury, and you on the jury, agreed with Larry Maxwell and said, give him the materials. The district, using the taxpayers' dollars, Margaret Thatcher made a great statement. She said, it's not public money, it's your money. Used your dollars to appeal it to the state. And there at the state appellate courts, along with a brief from the Attorney General of Texas, and his name was Dan Morales, and I think he's still in jail. And our State Board of Education, and my representative on the State Board of Education, signed a resolution in support of the district and against the parents, and they stated, and I quote, the right of a parent to direct the education of their child is not a fundamental right. That's wrong. That's when I decided I need to get involved, not knowing what the board did, how they did it, or even where they met. But I decided I could do a better job than the person who signed that resolution. And I've been there and I've learned a lot. And this isn't the first fight. The fight that y'all are working on is not going to be the last one. But we're called to stand. And stand again. Let me tell you why we're getting into these food fights. I'm not going to talk so much about CSCOPE as far as the content, the materials, and the good stuff, the bad stuff, the errors. We've got a very qualified expert for that. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about process. How we got here, maybe how we can get out of it. Everybody remember Jimmy Carter? Everybody remember the Constitution? Anybody know what the Department of Education is? Can anybody find the Department of Education in the Constitution of the United States? It's not there. It's a new creation. It was a payoff, political payoff to create it. Public education, we have independent school districts, and that's what the word means, independent. When I first ran for the board, the big complaint that we had in our advocacy was, let's get the state out of our local school districts. They're telling us what we have to teach, what we're going to teach, what time we have to start, what days we have to meet. Kind of an overburdensome. Let the local community. We have local school board members that dedicate their time. Same pay rate as us. Okay? I get the same bottle of water you got it. This is a Marco Rubio moment. But anyway, the Department of Education all of a sudden decided it was going to tell the states how to run their schools and the local districts. Well, how did they do that? With the money, federal funds. So in Jimmy Carter, we got the Department of Education. Now, I'm not being partisan, because then Daddy Bush came along and we had developed Goals 2000. When his son came along, George W. Bush, what program was it called? No taxpayer left standing. No. The Obama administration put their own name on it. What is it called?
Race to the top.
Race to the top. Governor Perry and the State Board of Education said no. A lot of grief for that. Why? Not because we said no to a good program. Not that we said no to a bad program. We said no to the $200 and some odd million that was supposed to come with those federal funds. Again, it was all about the money. Now, it's kind of like the health care bill. You had to vote for it before you saw what was in it. The race to the top, if Texas took the money, and the money came to the local districts, we had to sign on at the state level to a curriculum called
Common Core.
Y'all are paying attention. Common Core standards had not even been written when we were asked to sign on to taking the federal funds under Race to the Top. Texas and Alaska were the only two states that said no. Since then, a half dozen other states have figured out what's in it, and they've decided that they're not going to participate. So what did the federal government do? It went around the state of Texas, and they came down to the local districts. Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Boston, the large urban districts, the money was too great. They signed on to Common Core directly, took the money. Now we have an education system in Texas that says, look, we have state standards, they're called the Teach. This is a great crowd. That we have instructional materials, the textbooks that are supposed to be aligned to the instructional materials, and then we have a testing system, good or bad, the tax, the STAR, the Iowa, whatever, that match. You want to have your standards, you want to have your instructional materials, and you want to have your assessments at the end. Is they're going to be tested on this standard and using this material. It works if everything is aligned. I'm not an educator, but I'm a dad. I kind of figured this out for myself. You've interrupted it when you change the standards over here, Common Core, Race to the Top. We're going to get to CSCOPE. In your instructional materials right here, the CSCOPE are not aligned. And all of a sudden, we're going to ask all these kids to take these college entrance level ready exams and the STAR exam. Well, if we spend the next 4 or 5 years with standards and instructional materials that aren't aligned to the testing, what's going to happen? Grades are going to drop. Who are we going to blame? Teachers. Golly. I love this crowd. They're not the problem. They're not the problem. So now, Common Core, we have found links to CSCOPE. Let me tell you what happened to CSCOPE. It started several years ago, back about 4 years ago. Does everybody know what a regional service center is? Regional service centers, there are 20 of them. They're scattered around the state. Kind of a quasi-public agency, institution, service organization, collaborative, collective. Oh, those words get worse. No accountability. Who runs your regional service centers? Who sits on the board of directors for the regional service centers?
Next district
Superintendents. The top director for each one of those 20 service centers are the board of directors for the CSCOPE collective. Do we see a conflict of interest when the regional service center recommends to local service centers that they ought to buy this product with their good housekeeping seal, using tax dollars of yours to pay for something for people whose salaries we've already paid once? Follow the money. Follow the money. Well, it doesn't cost that much. It saves the districts a lot of money. We have 5 million children. I don't care if it costs $1. What's $1 times 5 million? What's $10 times 5 million? What's $100 times 5 million? It's a lot of money. The problem that we're discovering with CSCOPE happened when questions started being asked just in the last 6 months. And when questions were asked, you know what answers people got? It's like Larry Maxwell. We can't tell you. When we asked again, the question was, even if we did tell you, you're not qualified to understand it. Teachers were prohibited from addressing their neighbors who came forth and said, can I see that lesson plan? No, I can't give it to you. I have a contract that says that there are civil and criminal penalties attached if I did let you see the material. Those concerns were brought to the State Board of Education by teachers and parents. So the State Board of Education, who has authority over instructional materials up until about 2 years ago, that's another discussion, came back and said, we'd like to look at it. We were told no. It took our chairman 4.5 months to get the password to be able to find and see the instructional materials you're going to see just a very small smattering of today. So then that got the attention of Senator Dan Patrick, who's chairman of the Senate Public Ed Committee. He held a hearing. It wasn't pretty. Then Greg Abbott, the Attorney General, said, wait a minute, you guys are public institutions. I'd like to see what's going on. They told him no. That was the wrong guy. Greg Abbott's a pit bull. And he doesn't wear lipstick like the soccer moms. He's a little upset on how they're doing business. I think there's going to be a little bit more work on that end. So, aside from the secrecy, the deception, it only raises more questions. The reason that we're still in this problem today, or the real reason we're in this problem today, is due to prior legislation. Legislation is a wonderful thing. Sometimes it's for good. Sometimes there's unintended consequences. One of the primary roles that the State Board of Education has had is the review and the adoption and approval of instructional materials. Some of you I've met before. Big issue for the State Board of Education is textbooks. Whether it's health textbooks, or social studies, or science, or fine arts, English language arts. Textbooks are very controversial. They're in our classroom. What is it, the old saying? The philosophy of the classroom in this generation is the philosophy of the government in the next. Very passionate debates over instructional materials. You can be on either side of the issue. But at least you had a body that was accountable, that you could reach out, you could impact, had your viewpoint heard, whatever side of the argument you might have been on. And that process has worked for decades and decades in Texas. We have some of the best textbooks in Texas because publishers listen to Texas. Why? Traditionally, we have always paid for textbooks at the state level. Local school board member, if I ever had a local school board member come up and say, we don't have enough textbooks in our classrooms, whose fault is that? It was his. Because they forgot to order them. We have warehouses full of textbooks that are already paid for. The district simply has to put in the order, how many do you need and where do you want them shipped? That was up until, what, 2 years ago, Senate Bill 6. I was always a critic of the purchasing system because of cost. The way that it was always negotiated, the publisher sat down with the Texas Education Agency each year and negotiated out the maximum price for a textbook. Sounds like delusion to me. The publishers and the agency sat down together, so they decided that maybe a science book, the maximum price was going to be $45, and there's 5 publishers, major publishers. If it was $45, what do you think the price was when all the bids came in? $44.95. They're competitive. They dropped it a nickel. But when they approached the districts, we never discussed how much it was going to cost because, oh, well, somebody else, well, y'all were paying for it. Somebody else is going to pay for it. Well, that changed, and I thought it was a good idea. The legislation in Senate Bill 6 2 years ago said, we're now going to give the money directly to our independent school districts, let these guys make the good decisions. If they make a bad decision, that's their prerogative too. But we gave the money down to the districts to buy their own instructional materials. So now, Holt, Pearson, Muffin, all the major publishers are competing a little bit on price. Better value for the district, for the taxpayers. But the legislature had an unintended consequence. It allowed the district to buy it from anybody they wanted. Not only did they not have to buy any of the adopted approved materials from the state board, which used to be the conforming and the non-conforming, but they could buy it from Barnes & Noble, that little university in Austin, TU, in their departments. They could buy it online. Lots of options. So, with no oversight by anybody accountable on the elected level. That's where we got a problem with CSCOPE. We've been sold because it was cheap, and someone other than the State Board of Education said it was the best. So I think there needs to be a little feedback to state senators, state representatives. That was Senate Bill 6, whereas you, the taxpayers and citizens, lost control. Your State Board of Education representatives on content in textbooks. And then let's talk about where we are today. What do? We know why we got into this problem. Now, how do we fix it? The solution is right here. And I'm not picking on him because he's a good guy and he's still smiling at me. And I do practice my Second Amendment rights. In reaction to the Senate hearing, there was Senator Patrick gently encouraged CSCOPE to acquiesce to a voluntary review of some of the subject matter. There are almost 1,600, I want to make sure I'm accurate, whether it's 1,600 or 1,500, different curriculum lesson plans out there. We would like to look at maybe some of the more egregious ones first. So a review panel, an ad hoc committee was put together with 5 of their guys and 5 of our guys from the State Board of Education, and they've acquiesced to give us a password. We'd like to put some panels together, and if any of you are interested in sitting on those panels, you have to do it at the same reimbursement rate that I get for being here for you to go work on that project. You're more than welcome to review some of the curriculum and some of the lesson plans. We'd like to have your feedback. The only thing that we're empowered to do at the end of this process is to make recommendations back to the CSCOPE Collaborative. They can accept it, they can reject it, they can say thank you. There is legislation pending, and I believe you'll make a note, it's Senate Bill 1406. It has been heard in the Senate Education Committee. It will be going to the Senate floor in the next week. If it passes there, it will go over to the House of Representatives. And over in the House, they will consider the bill in the Public Education Committee and then the full House. It would require the regional service centers to submit all instructional materials now and in the future, and it wasn't specific to CSCOPE, but any instructional materials in the future to the State Board of Education for review and adoption. Who is y'all's state representative here in this part of Missouri?
Dennis Moore.
Dennis Bonin,
Yeah.
and Greg Bonin's probably a little bit, probably doesn't know where that. I saw Dennis Bonin in the Capitol the other day. Call his office. That would be a big help. Who's your state senator? Joan Huffman. Give her a call. She's a leader. She's good, but she needs to hear from you. That's Senate Bill 1406. Well, I think my time is up, and I think we'd like to move on to a little more of the meat of the matter. I do appreciate y'all. We're often called to take a stand. Having all that we can, we stand again, and I'll stand with y'all. Thank you very much. God bless you.